Texture. Every cool new website's got it. One texture I've noticed popping up more and more recently is this like animated lo-fi TV static effect. Paired generally with dark themed websites, this effect does a really good job of making background elements a bit more organic, if that makes sense. It's also possibly the simplest bang for your buck effect that you'll find on any like trendy new award style website, and we're gonna dive in and see how it works. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, me. Hover is a library of animated UI components built to help you make your React websites addicting for your users. You just find a component that you like, copy the code to your clipboard, drop it in your project, and wait for your friends to tell you how cool and interesting you are. Link in my description if you want to check that out. I won't spend any more time on it. Okay, let's get back to the show. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I've got a pretty bare bones HTML file here. We can take a look at what I've got. Just some basic stylings up here at the top. I've added a new font, which I'm actually not even using right now. I've just set the background color to black just because this looks a little bit better in my opinion on darker backgrounds. And before we look at these, we can scroll down a little bit. So I just have the body of my HTML file right here, a div inside of that with a class of container, my actual content here, and then this empty div, which is going to make up our actual overlay. We can scroll up to see our container classes. So all that really has is this position relative and an overflow of hidden. We'll come back to why we need that in just a minute. The title is just bumping up the font size a little bit. And then for our content here, I'm just placing everything in the center of the screen. Definitely doesn't have anything to do specifically with this effect, but just so you understand. And then a z index of 5 and a position of relative. We will see why we want to play with this as well in a minute, but essentially we're just going to want to be able to either push our content above or below our overlay div. Apart from this, I just have one other thing, which is a PNG that I'm using, which is just some white noise. To actually find something like this for yourself, you can literally just Google white noise and you should be able to find a million different versions of white noise. You'll notice that different kind of types of white noise are going to look different whenever you do this effect. So something like this is going to look different than something like this. I generally would just download a couple of them and then, swap between them to see which one looks better for your example. Essentially how this effect is going to work is pretty simple. So we're just going to take this noise texture that we've got. We're going to overlay it over the entire top of our container, and we're going to make it bigger than our container, and then we're just going to kind of animate it back and forth, and that animating of that texture is what's going to eventually end up just looking like static. If you think about it, all that this white noise texture is just a bunch of little blocks of white and black. So just animating this kind of up and down is going to not really look like it's an animation kind of moving from side to side. You're really kind of just replacing white and black pixels randomly across the screen. Obviously, if we left this completely opaque or completely visible, I guess, whatever, 100% opacity, this would just look like this black static, and that might not be what we want. So we'll also play around a little bit with the opacity itself to see what looks good. Again, it's going to look different for your example than my example, so just play with that when we get to it. Flipping back over to my index.html file, everything that we're going to want to do is just going to be inside of this fuzzy overlay class. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to start by setting a position of absolute. Remember that this fuzzy overlay class is within this container class, which then itself has a position of relative. So it's going to be absolutely positioned to this container class. And then I'm also going to set an inset of, we'll go with minus 200%. We're not going to see anything right now, so we can just start by saying maybe a background color or a background of red, just so we can see this. And because we haven't actually yet set a z index on this, that's going to be behind our image. That might be what you want, but you might also want to say bump up the z index so that it's on top of all of your content. We'll come back to that in just a second though. So all that we're doing here, if I actually bump this down, we'll say instead of minus 200%, we'll say 10% or something like that. 10%, there we go. Where it's essentially just saying top, left, bottom, and right, all of 10% paired with that absolute positioning. So if we just go all the way back to where we were, so back to minus 200%, that's like making this essentially twice the size of the screen. And whenever we make it that big, it's going to give us a lot of room to actually shift this back and forth to actually animate it so we don't see the sides of that image. I'm gonna replace our background here with our background image because that's actually gonna be what we want. So I'm gonna say background image, and give it a URL. And then the actual name of mine is noise.png. So we'll go noise.png. Now we'll see that we have our background image here repeating across the back of the screen. And again, this has no opacity on it right now, so I'm going to bump mine down. I think what ended up looking good for me with this exact example was something like 15%. Now we should just kind of barely be able to see that texture in the back. And now all that we have to do to actually get our effect here is to add an animation, which just translates this kind of up and down or left and right. We're going to do both, but you can play around with the different percentages and the direction to see what looks best for your example. So I'm going to come down to the bottom and I'm going to add a keyframes animation. I'll call mine shift. We're going to say we want to go from 0% to 100% like this. Oops, like this. Having problems here, like this. There we go. And I'm going to start this at a transform, translate X of say 10%. Then we can also do a translate Y of 10%, drop all these down in 100% as well. And then I'm just gonna go with minus 10%. Obviously nothing's happened yet. That's just because we haven't actually added our animation yet. So we can just come up here to the top and we'll say animation, give it our name, say how long we want this to go. I'm gonna go with 0.2 seconds. This is another one of those things that's gonna change the effect depending on how long this runs, but this I've seen looks pretty well with this texture I'm using. I want it to be a linear animation. I want it to run infinitely, and I want it to go both ways. So I want it to go from bottom right to top left to bottom right, etc. And as soon as we save this, we should now actually start seeing our animation. So if I zoom in, we're gonna see that we have what looks like TV static in the back. It'll be a little bit more visible if I bump this back up. So maybe we'll say 75% opacity. Now it really looks like TV static. I'll bump it back down. And then the one thing that you may wanna do for your example, it kind of depends, is actually have the static on top of all of your content as opposed to behind it. This isn't gonna work for every example, but in some cases it actually does look cool to have like your entire screen kind of look like a TV screen. So if you wanted to do something like that, all that you would wanna do is come to your fuzzy overlay and make sure that the Z index of that is bumped above the Z index of your content. So for instance, this one has a Z index of 5. So if I came down here, I could set this to a Z index of 10. And now we're gonna see that it's on top of our content. The only problem is now our content isn't interactable, which makes sense, right? Because we have some kind of div on top of it, but we can actually fix this problem by coming down on our fuzzy overlay here and setting a pointer events of none. So this is gonna mean any pointer interactions that are on this class right here are not going to take effect. It's gonna act essentially like that overlay is not even there. So now if you had some kind of button or something that you actually wanted somebody to be able to fill out, maybe like an input or something, that would still be interactable in the background. You can see a super quick example of that. So if I just added a button down here, click me, cool, popped up all the way down here. That's fine. We should still be able to see that we can still click and interact with stuff behind our overlay. And that is going to wrap up this effect. So just to recap one more time, all that we do is we have some kind of content inside of some kind of container which has an overflow of hidden. I'll show you what this looks like actually really quick if I don't have that. If I save that, now we're going to get all of these weird scroll bars because our thing is animating all over the place. So make sure you have some kind of container that has overflow hidden on it with the position of a relative. Inside of that, we have some kind of content with the Z index on it that is either higher or lower than our overlay div so that it's actually rendering in the right spot. If you want it to be in front of your overlay, it has to be higher. If you want it to be behind, it'll have to be lower. And then for our overlay div, we just want to give it a position of absolute, an inset of some value that's larger than the size of the actual screen, a background image of some kind of noise texture, which you should just be able to find on Google. Play around with those. Different ones are going to look different. Bump the opacity down, give that a Z index that makes sense for your example. If you want it to be in front of your content, just make sure that pointer events are set to none, and then animate it back and forth. I'll drop all the code for this down in the description. If you're also interested in a React version of this code, I have a free snippet of that on my website. You can just go to components, come down to the other tab and find fuzzy overlay, click on code over here, and you can just drag and drop all of that directly into your projects. Anyways, that's going to be it for this one. I will see you guys next time. Peace.